Welcome back to your nerdy show. I'm your host, Spoiler Master. Have you ever watched a vampire show and thought, wow, everybody in this story desperately needs therapy, but also couldn't stop watching because that's basically Interview with the Vampire Season 2. We're talking haunted memories, toxic vampire relationships, secret betrayals, a vampire theater troupe that's somehow even more dramatic than Broadway, and one of the most heartbreaking endings we've seen in a long time. And now that the Vampire Lestat is on the horizon, you absolutely need to remember what happened before we dive into the next chapter. So grab your coffin, avoid suspicious theater performances, and let's break down everything that happened in Interview with the Vampire Season 2. Louis and Claudia's journey through Europe. When we last left Louis and Claudia, they had seemingly killed Lestat back in New Orleans. Problem solved, right? Yeah, not even close. Season 2 begins with Louis and Claudia traveling through Europe shortly after World War II. Their goal is simple: find other vampires and finally understand what they are. But emotionally, these two are falling apart. Louis is constantly haunted by visions of Lestat, not the real Lestat, but a version living inside his mind. It's like carrying around your toxic ex in your head 24 hours a day. And Claudia? She's becoming increasingly distant from Louis. Their relationship is strained because deep down, both of them blame each other for what happened. Their search eventually takes them into Romania. They're looking for clues connected to ancient vampires and even Vlad the Impaler himself. Instead, they encounter something terrifying: feral vampire. Not a sophisticated immortal like Louis or Lestat. This thing is basically a monster, animalistic, brutal, barely intelligent. It's one of the first hints that the vampire world is much bigger and much stranger than they realized. The vampire's creator is a mysterious woman named Daciana, who has completely lost hope in immortality. Rather than joining Louis and Claudia, she chooses death and throws herself into fire. And honestly, that's a pretty dark sign of what's coming. After hearing that Paris has been liberated following the Nazi occupation, Louis and Claudia head there. And this is where everything changes. Enter Paris and the Théâtre des Vampires. Because Paris isn't just another city. It's home to the Théâtre des Vampires, the most important vampire community they've ever encountered. Now here's the crazy part. For months, Louis and Claudia don't even realize they're being watched. The local vampire coven has been monitoring them the entire time. Why? Because they broke vampire etiquette. Apparently, when traveling vampires enter another territory, they're supposed to announce themselves. Louis and Claudia didn't. Oops. That's basically the vampire equivalent of walking into somebody's house and eating food from their refrigerator without introducing yourself. Eventually, Louis meets the leader of the coven, Armand. And from the moment these two meet, you can feel the chemistry. It's intense, complicated, dangerous. Everything this show does best. Armand invites Louis to see a performance at the Théâtre des Vampires, and what Louis discovers is absolutely wild. This coven performs fake vampire murders on stage for human audiences. The audience thinks it's theater. The vampires know it's real, and the victims are actually dying. It's horrifying. And somehow it's also one of the coolest concepts in the entire series. Claudia quickly becomes fascinated by the coven, especially a charismatic vampire named Santiago. Meanwhile, Louis becomes increasingly drawn toward Armand, but there's a problem. Actually, several problems. First, Louis is still emotionally trapped by Lestat. Second, Armand knows more about Lestat than he's admitting. And third, the rest of the coven is beginning to notice Armand's special treatment of Louis, and they don't like it, not one bit. Claudia's new life in Louis falls for Armand. While Louis gets closer to Armand, Claudia begins the difficult process of joining the coven. And honestly, it's miserable. She gets hazed, forced into menial work, humiliated repeatedly. And after finally being accepted, she's given a role she'll play for decades. A child, again. And that's devastating for Claudia. Remember, Claudia's biggest tragedy has always been that she was turned into a vampire while physically young. Her mind continues growing, her emotions continue growing, but her body never changes. Imagine being trapped forever in the same appearance while everyone around you treats you like a child. That's Claudia's nightmare. And Season 2 really doubles down on that tragedy. Meanwhile, Louis and Armand's relationship becomes romantic. The two bond over their complicated history with Lestat, and eventually they share a kiss. For Louis, it feels like he's finally moving forward, like maybe he's escaping Lestat's shadow. But as we'll soon discover, nothing is ever that simple. Santiago's secret coup. Let's talk about the powder keg that's slowly building underneath everything. Santiago. Because Santiago becomes one of the season's most dangerous players. He's clever, manipulative, patient, and he can see exactly what's happening. He notices Armand breaking rules for Louis. He notices Claudia getting special treatment. and he begins quietly turning the coven against Armand. Then he finds something incredibly important, Claudia's journals. These journals contain detailed accounts of everything that happened with Lestat, including evidence that Louis and Claudia were involved in trying to kill him. For a vampire society that considers killing another vampire one of the greatest crimes imaginable, that's a massive problem, and Santiago knows exactly how to use it. Madeline and the beginning of the end. At the same time, Claudia develops a friendship with a human woman named Madeline. This relationship becomes one of the most emotional parts of the season, because for the first time, Claudia finds someone who truly sees her. Someone who understands her loneliness. Someone who loves her naturally. Claudia wants Madeline to become a vampire too. Her companion, her family, her forever person. Armand refuses. So Louis steps in and turns Madeline himself. And that decision ends up accelerating the disaster that's already heading toward them, because by now, the coven is fully preparing its coup. The trap is set, the players are in position, and Louis, Claudia, and Madeline are walking straight into it. The trial, the season's most devastating moment. Now we arrive at arguably the best episode of the season, the trial. And trust me, it's every bit as horrifying as you've heard. Louis, Claudia, and Madeline are captured, dragged before a packed audience, and placed on trial for violating vampire law. Except this isn't really a trial. The verdict has already been decided. It's theater, a performance, an execution disguised as entertainment. Santiago acts as ringmaster. The audience cheers. The coven performs. And then someone walks onto the stage, Lestat, alive. And suddenly everything changes. Because yes, Lestat survived. The man Louis and Claudia thought they killed has returned. His testimony becomes one of the most fascinating moments in the entire series. At first, he appears to support the prosecution, but as things continue, the cracks start showing. He goes off script. He apologizes to Louis. He reveals painful truths. And despite everything that's happened between them, it's obvious he still loves Louis. That's what makes this whole sequence so heartbreaking. Nobody in this story is innocent, but nobody is completely heartless either. Unfortunately, the outcome is devastating. Claudia and Madeline are sentenced to death. Louis receives banishment, at least officially. In reality, he's imprisoned inside a coffin and buried in a crypt. Meanwhile, Claudia and Madeline face execution, and this scene is absolutely brutal. They're exposed to sunlight, the one thing vampires cannot survive. And despite all Claudia endured throughout both seasons, despite all her hopes, dreams, and struggles, this is where her story ends. It's one of the most tragic moments in the entire series, and honestly, many viewers were left emotionally wrecked. Louis' revenge. But the story isn't over, not even close, because Louis survives, and when he escapes, all that grief becomes rage. Pure rage. He returns to the Théâtre de Vampires and unleashes absolute destruction. The coven is massacred. The theater burns. Years of power and tradition go up in flames. It's Louis at his most terrifying. And after everything he's lost, you completely understand why. The only notable survivor is Sam, who manages to escape. Everyone else pays the price. The truth about Armand. Afterward, Louis reunites with Armand, and for a while, it seems like they're finally choosing each other. Louis even symbolically rejects Lestat, not by killing him physically, but by deciding to spend his future with Armand instead. For decades, that becomes the official story, the version both men tell themselves, the version they tell everyone else. But here's where the present-day storyline changes everything, because Daniel Molloy starts uncovering the truth. Throughout Season 2, Daniel becomes increasingly suspicious. His memories don't line up. Louis' memories don't line up. And eventually, they discover why. Armand has been manipulating memories. A lot of memories, including events that happened during the original 1973 interview. The deeper Daniel digs, the uglier the truth becomes. And eventually, he uncovers the biggest revelation of all. Armand wasn't the hero of the trial. He wasn't secretly trying to save Louis. He was actually involved in orchestrating the entire thing. The script proves it. The evidence is undeniable. And suddenly, decades of trust collapse in an instant. Louis and Lestat finally reconcile. This revelation completely shatters Louis. Everything he believed about Armand changes. Every memory gets re-examined. Every sacrifice looks different. Every act of love becomes suspect. So Louis finally does what he probably should have done a long time ago. He leaves. And that brings us to one of the most emotional scenes in the entire finale. Louis returns to New Orleans and meets Lestat again. Not as enemies. Not as lovers trying to hurt each other. Not as victims, just two broken people carrying decades of pain. Their reunion isn't about fixing everything, because some wounds never fully heal. It's about honesty, acceptance, forgiveness, and finally acknowledging the love that never truly disappeared. It's a beautiful scene, quiet, melancholic, human, even though neither of them is technically human anymore. Daniel's transformation and the future. But Season 2 still has one final surprise. Daniel Molloy becomes a vampire, turned by Armand. And after all these years, Daniel finally joins the world he spent decades investigating. Then he publishes the interview. The story becomes a bestseller. The public thinks it's a marketing stunt, a publicity gimmick. Nobody actually believes vampires are real, which is honestly kind of hilarious. Imagine publishing proof that supernatural creatures exist and everyone just assumes it's clever advertising. Meanwhile, Louis embraces the truth about himself. No more hiding, no more pretending, no more running. And when vampires around the world become furious after reading the interview, Louis basically sends them a message. Come find me. He doesn't beg for mercy. He doesn't apologize. He doesn't hide. He dares them to come. Our nerdy thoughts. And that's where season 2 leaves us, with Louis standing stronger than ever, Lestat back in the picture, Armand exposed, Daniel transformed, and the entire vampire world thrown into chaos, which sets the stage perfectly for the Vampire Lestat. Because if season 2 was Louis' story, the next chapter belongs to Lestat. And if you know anything about Lestat de Lioncourt, you know one thing for sure. He's never going to stay quiet for long. So what did you think about season 2? Were you heartbroken by Claudia's fate? Did Armand betray Louis, or was he trapped by circumstances? And are you excited to finally see the story shift to Lestat's perspective? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more vampire breakdowns, and I'll see you in the next one.
No, what the heck, I'll laugh anyway.